වීව එකතුණු උකුතේ එකක
රස උපරිමයි.
හරිම සුළුයි.
Tonight on First at 9, this Sunday, the 5th of February 2023. We are family. Sri Lanka is not alone during the crisis, says Commonwealth Secretary-General Patricia Scotland. Eliminating barriers. Sri Lankan envoy in New Delhi is confident that economic integration with India is the path to Sri Lanka's recovery.
We are looking at setting up a petroleum hub in Trincomalee and trying to work with India on petroleum.
Market trends. Litro increases prices of its LP gas products but assures availability of sufficient stocks. Decentralized currency. Adopting Bitcoin and digitizing the Sri Lankan economy will attract more investors, says billionaire investor Tim Draper.
It is interesting to see the politicians who are against Bitcoin are the ones who don't want to have perfect records. And the ones who are for it are thinking, this could be so good for my country.
Meanwhile, Sri Lanka's central bank governor refuses Bitcoin adoption, warning of worsening the economic crisis.
උසස් පෙළට පසු කොලිෆයි වෙමු ඉහළට යමු ජය අරගමු ප්‍රොමෝෂන් එකට ඊළඟ දාගත්තොත් ඩිග්‍රිය ගොඩ
ජාතික වැවිලි කළමනාකරන ආයතනය NIPM වෙතින් රාජ්‍ය වගකීම සහ ලෝපිළිගත් උපාධියක් තරුණ ඔබට Be smart, be qualified, be recognized with NIPM ජාතික වැවිලි සරසවිය.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9 with Indivadi Amuwata. From Studio 24 in Colombo.
And a warm welcome. We take you straight to your top stories tonight. Commonwealth Secretary-General Patricia Scotland assures Sri Lanka is not alone as the nation continues to feel the weight of political and economic pressures. Addressing the geopolitical cartographer in Colombo, the visiting Commonwealth Secretary-General said member states of the Commonwealth family are responsible for one another.
The geopolitical cartographer was held in Colombo yesterday under the theme The Role of Commonwealth in an Era of Polycrisis under the patronage of Commonwealth Secretary-General Patricia Scotland and President Ranil Wickremesinghe.
For a long time, we belonged to a region known as the Indian Ocean, and all of a sudden it became the Indo-Pacific. So that is geopolitical cartography. The same thing, Europe has a problem now of where to draw the boundaries between Russia and Ukraine. It keeps changing throughout the world. Various claims are made, but we have to learn now that cartography depends completely on geopolitics and nothing else. So we called the name geopolitical cartographer, but was to discuss how geopolitics and geoeconomics was changing the Indian Ocean, the most vital ocean in the world. Till about the 18th century, this was also the richest. And in time to come, before end of the century, again you will find first the development of South Asia, of Indonesia and Southeast Asia, of the Middle East, and finally the big development explosion in Africa. So you might be that's why the focus is completely on this new emerging region. And the first person to come here and to be invited here is none other than the Secretary General of the Commonwealth. She's been a good friend of Sri Lanka. She's been a good friend of Asia and Africa, and she represents our thinking. But there's also another reason for her to be here, for the Commonwealth to be here. When we got independence, we first joined the Commonwealth. We were admitted to the Commonwealth. And it was only correct that the Secretary General of the Commonwealth should be here on our 75th anniversary of independence. You were there when we got independence, and you all are here now. So it's to mark that occasion that she was invited here by the government to take part in the 75th anniversary of our independence.
During her address, Commonwealth Secretary-General Patricia Scotland, who touched on the current economic crisis in the country, acknowledged that the weight of the political and economic pressure Sri Lankans continue to face can be hard to bear. She assured that although the situation can be destabilizing, isolating and frightening, Sri Lankans are not alone among the Commonwealth family. She added that the reality is that the entire world is living under pressure and is tightly bound by a tangled knot of crises spanning global systems, which is a world living with social, political and economic consequences of COVID-19.
President Ranil Wickremesinghe, meanwhile, spoke to several diplomats visiting Sri Lanka and discussed the implementation of the 13th Amendment to the Constitution and measures taken to ensure ethnic harmony with Indian State Minister of Foreign Affairs V. Mullaridharan. Now, the head of state also discussed strengthening business ties and religious tourism with Pakistani State Minister of Foreign Affairs Hina Rabbani Kar.
Several foreign dignitaries visited Sri Lanka to attend the 75th independence celebration of Sri Lanka. India's External Affairs State Minister V. Mullaridharan, who visited Sri Lanka, called on President Ranil Wickremesinghe at the Presidential Secretariat, where they discussed the implementation of the 13th Amendment to the Constitution and measures taken to ensure ethnic harmony in Sri Lanka. The Indian State Minister also commended measures taken by the President so far on the matters. Meanwhile, Pakistani State Minister of Foreign Affairs Hina Rabbani Kar, who called on President Ranil Wickremesinghe at the Presidential Secretariat, appreciated the commitment made by the Sri Lankan head of state for economic recovery efforts. While the discussions focused on the development of business ties and tourism, especially in the field of religious tourism, the Pakistani State Minister extended an invitation to the President to visit Pakistan. In the meantime, discussions between President Ranil Wickremesinghe and Bhutan's Education Minister Jai Bir Rai centered on strengthening ties between the two countries with a greater focus towards education and improving cultural ties, especially in the fields of tourism. Nepal's Minister of Foreign Affairs Dr. Bimal Rai Paudhyal, who visited Sri Lanka for the Independence Day celebration, called on President Wickremesinghe. She welcomed the initiatives taken by the President in tackling climate change and also expressed the desire to further strengthen tourism between the two countries. Japanese State Minister of Foreign Affairs Takei Shinsuke called on President Ranil Wickremesinghe on Friday when the Japanese minister donated 150 motorcycles, 74 vans and minibuses and 115 pieces of surveillance equipment for the use of Sri Lankan Police Department. The donations were made by the Japanese government to improve the quality of investigative operations of the Sri Lankan police.
Sri Lankan High Commissioner in New Delhi, Milinda Murugadoss, says ongoing discussions are focused on how India can help Sri Lanka in the economic recovery process. During an interview to Indian media, WION, High Commissioner Murugadoss said talks are underway in developing Trincomalee as a petroleum hub to better cater to the petroleum requirements of India, which is expected to rise by 15% in year 2030. Also speaking about the 13th Amendment, the Sri Lankan envoy said talks are underway to find a democratic solution on its implementation.
We are discussing with India the role that India can play in the economic recovery phase, in tourism, investments into Sri Lanka, maybe trade expansion, rupee trade, because rupee trade could help us a lot as well.
How do you see the visit of EM Jaishankar helping reset the relationship between the two countries and perhaps bringing more momentum to the relationship?
Dr. Jaishankar brought an invitation to our president to visit India from Prime Minister Modi, so that also should be happening in the near future. Integrating our two economies would be the way for us to recover, because India is going to grow at over 6% now. It's going to be the fastest growing country in the world. If we can tag on to India in different sectors, tourism is obviously one. We are looking at renewable energy, electricity, whether the two grids can be combined, the Indian electricity grid and Sri Lanka's. Then we are looking at setting up a petroleum hub in Trincomalee and trying to work with India on petroleum, because your requirements for petroleum will grow by about 50% by year 2030. Your refining requirements will grow by about 1/3. So Trincomalee is ideally positioned to become a petroleum and energy hub. Already Indian Oil is managing the tank farm together with Sri Lanka Petroleum. If we can link that tank farm with India, if we can maybe look at a refinery there, that integration will help our economy grow.
Do you see that when it comes to Sri Lanka, there is India-China going in Colombo as well,
We are living in a different geopolitical environment and a geo-economic environment because all this, the impact is on both to what we lived in, let's say, 10 years ago. So that is the reality. And in the Indian Ocean, there are tensions that we cannot ignore. And Sri Lanka, we are a small country. We can become, in a way, a football in a bigger game, if you will. Our premise is very clear on security. Sri Lanka's security is India's security, and India's security is Sri Lanka's security. Within that frame, we will deal with all powers who are around.
Adani is in the headlines for reasons everyone knows. Are you worried that now it might impact the port's development, the Western Terminal Port?
As of now, not, because that is a very good project and Adani Group is very strong in that particular sector. It's interesting, the statistics on that, as I understand it, 80% of business done by Colombo Port is transshipment business. 70% of that transshipment business goes to India. 35% of that 70% is already going to Adani control ports. From a business point of view, it's a perfect fit.
Is the 13th Amendment, will it be implemented?
13th Amendment is in the Constitution of Sri Lanka. We have had provincial councils. But the problem has been that since the war ended, the discussion among all communities to come to a consensus on exactly what the best model of devolution for us is, that has been going on.
But are the Tamil parties on board? Are they agreed to it?
There is debate and dispute. I think through the democratic process, we have to find a solution. There is a dispute on some elements that need to be implemented. There are two sides. Different groups think differently about it. We have to find ways of bringing people together. And I think the President is trying to do that.
Minister of Foreign Affairs Ali Sabri meanwhile says that the importance of Sri Lanka's places in using economic diplomacy as a tool to harness fully economic engagement with Africa should be emphasized. He made these remarks during the recently held first Sri Lanka-Africa Business Forum at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which was attended by 17 visiting heads of mission from the African region and CEOs and business leaders from Sri Lanka. The discussions during the forum focused on how Sri Lankan businesses could leverage their comparative advantage to enter the African regional markets. The minister stated that there is much untapped potential to expand Sri Lanka's market share in the African region in key value-added exports and new targeted priority sectors, including renewable energy, ICT and digital technology, pharmaceuticals, construction industry and the supply of Sri Lankan skilled labour for foreign employment. And in your headline-making story, earlier today, Gas Lanka announced a price hike of domestic liquefied petroleum gas effective from midnight tonight. Speaking at a media briefing, the chairman of Gas Lanka highlighted that the price revision had to be made given the drastic rise in prices of LP gas in the international market.
Accordingly, the price of a 12.5 gas cylinder will be increased by 334 rupees to 4,743 rupees. The 5 kilogram cylinder price is to be increased by 134 rupees to 1,904 rupees. Meanwhile, the price of a 2.3 kilogram cylinder will be increased by 61 rupees to 883 rupees. Speaking at a media briefing, the chairman of Gas Lanka, Mudita Piris, highlighted that these price hikes were made due to the rise in global gas prices.
මිල සූත්‍රයට සාපේක්ෂව ලෝක වෙළඳපොලේ මිල ගණන් අනුව අද අපි වැඩි කළ යුතු නියම මිල රුපියල් 950ක් විතර පමණ වෙනවා. නමුත් අපිට හැකි වුණා ලොකු මිල වැඩිවීමකින් ලෝක වෙළඳපොලේ ගෑස් මිල වැඩි වෙනවා කියන එක දැනගෙන දෙසැම්බර් මාසයේ අපේ උපකල්මටපත් පිළිහිටලා අපි ජනවාරි මාසයේ වැඩිපුර ටොන් 7000කට අධික ප්‍රමාණයක් ඇනවුම් කළා. ඒකේ මිලියන 500ක වගේ ලාභයක් අපි ලැබුවා. ඒ මිලියන 500කට මදක් වැඩි ලාභය මුළුමනින්ම අපි පාරිභෝගික ජනතාව වෙත මුදාහරින්න තීරණය කළා. ඒ අනුව තමයි අද රුපියල් 950කින් වැඩි විය යුතු සිලින්ඩරය රුපියල් 334කින් පමණක් වැඩි වෙලා අපිට මේ විදියට මේක කළමනාකරණය කරන්න පුළුවන් වුණේ. ඒ කෙසේ වෙතත් අපිට තියෙන ඩොලර් සංචිත එක්ක අපිට ඇනවුම් කරන්න ලැබුණේ ගෘහස්ත ගෑස් සිලින්ඩර් කියන සෙග්මන්ට් එකට විතරයි. අපි එදා කිව්වාගේ 2024 සිංහල අවුරුද්ද පහ වෙනක අපිට ගෑස් තොග ඇති තරම් තියෙනවා.
තුමාගේ ගෘහස්ත ගෑස් වලට පමණයි මේ සහනය දෙන්න හම්බ වෙන්නේ කියලා. ඒකට කිලෝග්‍රෑම් 34 විශාල ප්‍රමාණයක
ඒකේ ගාන අනිවාර්යයෙන්ම වැඩි වෙනවා. කීයකින්ද මිල වැඩි වෙන්නේ කියන එක අපි තාම තීරණය කළා නැහැ. ඒක ඉදිරියේ දැනුම් දෙයි. අපේ කියවීම තමයි පෙබරවාරි මාර්තු අප්‍රේල් වගේ මාස 3ක වගේ කාලයක් මිල යම් තාක් දුරකට වැඩි වෙන ප්‍රවණතාවය කරලා තියෙනවා. නමුත් ඒක ගැන හරියටම අනාවැකියක් කියන්න අපිට බෑ. නමුත් අප්‍රේල් මාසෙන් පස්සේ නැවත වතාවක් මේක සෙටල් වෙන්න පටන් ගන්නවා මේ අවුරුද්දේ අවසාන භාගයේ වගේ.
Taking you to business news, Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, Dr. Nandalal Veerasinghe, has stated that Sri Lankan authorities do not intend to aggravate the current economic crisis by introducing Bitcoin to the market. He made these remarks at a meeting with billionaire Silicon Valley investor Tim Draper, who visited Sri Lanka to shoot an episode of his TV show with local entrepreneurs and met President Ranil Wickremesinghe to promote the adoption of cryptocurrency in Sri Lanka.
Speaking at an event in Colombo, billionaire Tim Draper expressed his views on the importance of digitizing the Sri Lankan economy in the context of the current economic crisis and averting rampant corruption using Bitcoin's perfect records.
When you have this lack of confidence in government, lacking of confidence in a currency, there's only one way to go, and that's up from here. And the way to go up is through technology. And the best countries are the ones who continue to innovate. I think my advice for Sri Lanka is you've been painted into a corner by the press. You have to repaint yourself as the place for entrepreneurs, a place for technology. And the suggestions I made to the president were think in terms of attracting entrepreneurs. And that's by encouraging them to come and make their lives really interesting and exciting while they're here. If you had 5G everywhere, if you had Bitcoin as a currency, if you had specialization in AI, if the government started to say we're going to transform our country into one that is digitized, and by being digitized, it's honest, amazing things could happen. It is interesting to see the politicians who are against Bitcoin are the ones who don't want to have perfect records for some reason. And the ones who are for it are thinking, this could be so good for my country for the next 40 years.
However, Bloomberg reported that during a meeting with Governor of the Central Bank, Dr. Nandalal Veerasinghe, Draper's proposals were rebuffed by arguing that adoption of 100% Bitcoin will not be a Sri Lankan reality ever. When questioned by Draper on what the advantage of having a sovereign currency is, Dr. Nandalal noted that a country without its own sovereign currency could not have monetary policy independence. While stating that other technologies could efficiently distribute financial services to foster inclusion and disburse electronic welfare payments, Dr. Nandalal Veerasinghe finally stated that the authorities did not want to make the crisis worse by introducing Bitcoin.
According to French officials, France and Germany's economy ministers will tell senior US officials not to try to actively poach green investments from Europe when they visit Washington next week to raise concerns about US green tech subsidies. These developments come off the back of previous discussions between EU officials and American officials on the US Inflation Reduction Act, which experts say can drive green investments out of the European Union.
France's Bruno Le Maire and Germany's Robert Habeck are due to press concerns in Washington about tax credits under the United States Inflation Reduction Act that subsidizes products from electric cars to solar panels as long as they meet requirements on being locally produced. According to officials from France's economy ministry, the two European ministers are due to meet White House officials on Tuesday, in addition to Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, Trade Representatives Catherine Tai, and Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo. EU governments are worried the tax credits not only put European producers at an unfair disadvantage, but could be actively used to lure investments away from Europe to the United States. One of the ministers' messages will be to not approach European companies about moving plants to the US. Officials further said the aim was to avoid aggressive pitches to EU firms to invest in the United States. Officials stated that there was little scope for new concessions from Washington for better treatment of EU companies after the European Commission already secured a partial win on electric vehicles built outside North America qualifying for tax credits if leased by the customers. Nonetheless, the ministers are hoping to convince US officials to allow more leniency over local production requirements for critical materials used in electric vehicle batteries. They will also seek a US commitment to be transparent about subsidies companies receive under the Inflation Reduction Act.
Well, that wraps up tonight's edition of First at 9 on AdaDerana 24. Be sure to tune in to our social media channels for the very latest. I'm Derana English. Good night.
For news and information you can trust 24 hours a day, visit AdaDerana.lk.